For many years across the stars, the word human was spoken with both awe and fear. In the outer colonies and space stations far from Earth, stories were told in whispers, stories that painted humanity as something between a myth and a warning. Aliens said Earth was a cursed planet, a death world, a place so dangerous that only monsters could survive there. They said even the air could choke you, the water could poison you, and the plants could slice through skin like knives. And yet somehow the creatures that called that world home, humans, not only survived but thrived. They had learned to fight storms, climb frozen mountains, and live in deserts that killed most life. They had faced famine, plague, and endless wars among themselves. But instead of dying out, they had grown stronger. Every disaster became a lesson. Every tragedy made them harder to break. And when they left their deadly home to reach the stars, they carried that same will to survive and the same ruthless, unstoppable instinct that had once kept them alive on Earth. To the rest of the galaxy, humans were unpredictable. Some saw them as explorers and inventors. Others saw them as conquerors waiting for a reason to strike. They traded, laughed, made friends. And yet there was always something dangerous behind their eyes. They didn't always follow the same logic as other species. They were too emotional, too passionate, too willing to take risks that no sane creature would even consider. The stories grew wild over time. Pilots claimed to have seen humans fight beasts twice their size barehanded. Soldiers told tales of human Marines surviving without air, food, or water for days in enemy territory. Traders swore they'd seen human captains smile in the middle of a firefight, like death itself was just another challenge. But the truth was, most of the galaxy had never actually met a human. The fear came from rumors passed between starports and outposts, from the survivors of small conflicts who swore they had seen the Death Worlders and lived to tell about it. In one bar on a mining moon, an old Tyrell captain once said, "You can reason with most species, but not with humans. They fight like they were born to lose and still win." Another replied, "If that's true, may the stars protect us the day they come as an army." For years, that day never came. Humans were explorers now, mostly peaceful, focused on trade and diplomacy. They had joined galactic councils, signed treaties, and built colonies alongside alien allies. They had become part of the larger community, a strange, intense part, but still a part. The old stories faded into background noise. The galaxy began to think that perhaps the Death Worlder legend was exaggerated. Maybe humans weren't as dangerous as the rumors claimed. Then came Varus 9. Varus 9 was a beautiful planet on the edge of the galactic rim. Its skies were purple, its oceans bright silver under twin suns. The species who lived there, the Varisians, were known for peace and science. They had no armies, no weapons capable of large-scale war. They believed diplomacy could solve anything. For a long time it did. But the galaxy is not kind to the peaceful. When the Kreth Dominion came, the Varisians were unprepared. The Kreth were conquerors and brutal, efficient, and merciless. Their fleets burned through colonies like wildfire, enslaving or exterminating anything that resisted. When they reached Varus 9, they demanded surrender. The Varisians tried to negotiate, but the Kreth didn't come for peace. They came for control. Within a week, cities burned, towers fell, and millions fled into the forests and caves. The Varisian Council sent distress signals into deep space, desperate, hopeless cries for help. They didn't expect anyone to answer, but someone did. The signal reached human space. The Terran Federation's command center received it first. It was just one of many pleas for help from distant worlds. There was no treaty, no alliance, no reason for humans to get involved. The Council debated for hours. Why risk their soldiers for strangers? Why fight a war that wasn't theirs? Then Captain Mira Solon spoke. She was a veteran of many battles and calm, sharp-eyed, and known for leading the 9th Human Expeditionary Force. Her words were simple, but they struck through the noise like lightning. "If no one else will stand for them," she said, "then we will." No one argued after that. Within hours, fleets were mobilized. The 9th Expeditionary Force, sometimes called the Ghost Division, because they moved without warning and left no survivors on the battlefield, prepared for launch. They didn't go for glory, and they didn't go for conquest. They went because someone had asked for help, and for humanity that was reason enough. When word spread that humans were deploying a full strike force, the galaxy held its breath. Some called it madness, others called it suicide. The Kreth Dominion had crushed a dozen civilizations. What could one human division possibly do? But there were a few who remembered the old stories. And they whispered, "The Death Worlders are coming." On Varus 9, the night sky filled with fire as human ships entered orbit. The Varisians watched in awe as the massive dark vessels descended through the clouds, leaving trails of burning light. They had never seen such machines, never felt the ground shake from engines designed for war. Then the dropships landed. The first Varisian scouts approached the humans cautiously. What they saw changed their understanding of fear forever. The soldiers were taller than expected, clad in black armor that gleamed under the alien sun. Their weapons looked alive, humming softly with energy. Their movements were perfectly synchronized, silent, efficient, purposeful. They did not speak much. They didn't shout or boast like the Kreth soldiers. They simply advanced, scanning, calculating, preparing. Every gesture, every step had a purpose. To the Varisians, it was like watching living storms, calm on the surface, but carrying unimaginable power beneath. At first they thought these humans were machines, but when one soldier took off his helmet, his face was calm, human, and his eyes burned with something even the machines of war could never replicate: resolve. The first battle began at dawn. The Kreth, confident after days of victory, attacked in full force. The humans didn't flinch. They moved like shadows, vanishing and reappearing, using the terrain with terrifying precision. Every time the Kreth tried to push forward, they were met with fire and fury. Varus 9's forest burned, the sky filled with streaks of plasma, and the ground trembled under bombardments. Yet the human lines never broke. They fought with discipline that the Kreth had never seen before. When their ammo ran low, they used knives. When communications failed, they used hand signals. And when reinforcements didn't come, they adapted. The Kreth had always thought themselves unstoppable. But the Death Worlders didn't fight to win. They fought to survive. And there's nothing in the galaxy more dangerous than a human who refuses to die. For the first time, the galaxy saw what humans were truly capable of, not through rumor, not through legend, but through action. The fear that had once been built on stories now had proof. By the time the battle ended, Varus 9 still stood. The Kreth Dominion had been forced to retreat, not because they lacked weapons, but because they had seen something they could not defeat: determination that bordered on madness. And across the galaxy, the whispers began again. Only this time they were not just about fear. They were about respect. The stories spread faster than light, of soldiers from the Death World who had come not for conquest, but for protection. Of warriors who bled for strangers. Of humans who looked at an impossible war and said, "We'll handle it." For decades, the galaxy had feared what humans might do if they ever unleashed their full power. After Varus 9, they no longer needed to imagine. They had seen it. And in that moment, the legend of the Death Worlders became real. Varus 9 was a world that lived in peace. It was small, distant, and almost forgotten by the major powers of the galaxy. The planet was covered in shining green plains, wide silver rivers, and cities that glowed softly under twin suns. Its people were not warriors. They were scientists, artists, and builders. They cared little for weapons or soldiers. Theirs was a world of harmony, built through trust and cooperation. Different alien species lived side by side there. The Varisians, tall and graceful, were the planet's founders. The small insect-like Krevans worked the mines. The water-dwelling Olari kept the rivers clean and full of life. Together they had created something rare in the galaxy. A world where differences were not feared, but celebrated. But such peace is fragile. Beyond Varus 9, in the dark reaches of space, a power was rising: the Kreth Dominion. The Kreth were not builders or thinkers. They were conquerors. Their empire stretched across hundreds of systems, ruled by cold efficiency and brutal discipline. They believed only the strong had the right to survive, and they saw Varus 9's kindness as weakness. The invasion began without warning. One night, the skies of Varus 9 lit up with fire as Kreth warships appeared in orbit. The first bombardment struck the northern colonies. The peaceful city of Hurrian was reduced to ash in minutes. The Varisians had no military, no defense fleets, no planetary shields. Their cities were open, their people unarmed. The Council of Varus tried to contact the invaders, pleading for diplomacy, but the Kreth did not answer. They came to take, not to talk. Panic spread across the planet. The once busy marketplaces turned into chaos. Families ran to the hills and forests hoping to hide. The Kreth soldiers landed next, tall in black armor, their red visors glowing like fire. They moved from city to city, rounding up survivors, demanding surrender. Those who resisted were destroyed. Within days, half of Varus 9 had fallen. In the capital city, the Varisian Council gathered in desperation. They activated the Deep Space Relay, an ancient communication system meant for emergencies. Through that signal, they sent a simple message, a cry for help that echoed across the galaxy. To any who can hear us, we are under attack. We are peaceful people. We need help, please. It was all they could do. That signal traveled through hyperspace, passing through abandoned stations, silent satellites, and empty trade routes until it reached the edge of Terran Federation space. On Earth, in the cold halls of the Federation's command complex, the message appeared on a holographic screen, a small blue planet, coordinates blinking, unknown species, no official contact, no treaty. The council members looked at one another in silence. Earth had its own troubles, border disputes, pirate raids, and fragile alliances to protect. Helping an unknown alien world would mean diverting ships, soldiers, and resources. It would mean risking war with the Kreth Dominion. The politicians argued for hours. Varus 9 is outside our jurisdiction, one said. We can't risk human lives for strangers. If we intervene, another warned, the Kreth will see it as a declaration of war. It's not our fight, said a third. The room buzzed with fear and logic, the kind that hides behind safety and reason. Then, from the back of the room, a single voice broke through. Captain Mira Solon stood tall, her uniform crisp, her dark eyes steady. She had led human soldiers through some of the worst battles in history. She had seen what happens when good people do nothing, and she would not watch another world burn while the council debated. Her words were quiet, but every person in that chamber felt their weight. If no one else will stand for them, she said, then we will. The room fell silent. For a long moment, no one spoke. Even the High Admiral, a man known for cold strategy, looked at her with something between shock and admiration. Humanity had spent centuries trying to prove it could be civilized, that it could rise above its brutal past. But sometimes she thought civilization was not silence, it was action. The council voted again. This time the decision was unanimous. The Federation would respond. Messages were sent to every human fleet. The order was simple: mobilize. Across dozens of star systems, ships powered up. Engines roared. Soldiers packed gear and armor. Medics prepared supplies. The 9th Human Expeditionary Force, led by Captain Solon, began assembling. They were known as the Death World Division, not officially but by reputation. Soldiers forged from the harshest world in known space. These were not conquerors. They were survivors. When word spread through the ranks about Varus 9's call for help, no one hesitated. Humanity had many flaws: pride, stubbornness, anger. But when it came to protecting the weak, they never turned away. Within hours, massive human battleships lifted off from Earth's orbit. The fleet stretched across the stars like a moving storm. Civilian channels went silent as the Death Worlders deployed. Even the alien ambassadors who lived on Earth watched in quiet disbelief. The galaxy had heard the stories, the tales of human ferocity and madness in battle, but few had seen it with their own eyes. Now they would. As the ships jumped into hyperspace, Captain Solon stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Resolute. The hologram of Varus 9 floated before her, a small glowing sphere, fragile and beautiful. Around her, officers watched her in silence. One asked quietly, "Ma'am, do you really think we can win this?" Solon didn't look away from the image. Her voice was calm. "Winning isn't the point," she said. "They called for help. That's enough." The Resolute's engines thundered to life, and the stars stretched into streaks of light as the fleet vanished into hyperspace. Back on Varus 9, the people huddled in caves and ruins, unaware that help was already on its way. The Kreth continued their assault, confident that no one would dare oppose them. But far away, the Death Worlders were coming, and with them came something the Kreth had never faced before. A species that didn't fear death, a people who fought not for glory, but for others. Everywhere the news spread, the galaxy watched. On neutral planets, traders whispered, "The humans are moving." In Kreth command centers, admirals scoffed, calling it foolishness. But in their hearts, even they felt a flicker of unease, because the old story said that when humans truly fought, they didn't stop. They didn't retreat. They didn't surrender. And now, for the first time in generations, the galaxy was about to see if those stories were true. On board the human fleet, the soldiers prepared for combat. Some checked weapons, some stared out into the endless dark thinking of home. Others shared quiet laughter, trying to ease the tension. They were soldiers from different nations, different backgrounds. But all shared one thing: the unshakable belief that doing the right thing was worth the risk. As the fleet neared the Varus system, Captain Solon gave her final command: "Set course for Varus 9, we answer their call." No music played. No speeches were made. The only sound was the hum of engines and the heartbeat of thousands of humans ready to fight for strangers. In that moment, the legend of Earth's Deathworlders took its next step, not born from conquest, but from compassion. The Kreth Dominion had no idea what was coming. They thought they were facing another frightened colony, another weak species begging for mercy. They didn't know that mercy was exactly what made humans dangerous, because once the Deathworlders decided to protect someone, there was no power in the galaxy that could make them stop. The morning the human fleet arrived above Varus 9, the skies turned red. The Varisians had seen ships before: cargo haulers, diplomatic cruisers, slow, peaceful vessels drifting gently through the clouds. But this was different. These were warships, massive and dark like floating fortresses. Their hulls glowed with blue energy lines, and their formation was flawless, a wall of steel and light that moved with terrifying grace. At first, the Varisians thought only a few soldiers would land. Perhaps a diplomatic team or a rescue squad. That's what they expected, a handful of humans offering limited help. They didn't understand what it meant when the humans said, "We're sending the 9th." The 9th Human Expeditionary Force was not a small task force. It was a legend, a storm wrapped in armor. And that storm was now descending upon Varus 9. The first dropships broke through the clouds like thunderbolts. Fire streaked behind them as they entered the atmosphere, engines howling. The ground shook when they landed in the plains outside the ruined city of Arvin. Dust rose in great waves, and the Varisians watching from the hills could barely see through it. Then the dust cleared, and they saw them. The soldiers of the 9th stepped out in formation, each one towering, armored from head to toe in black exosuits that gleamed like polished obsidian. Their helmets had narrow visors that glowed faintly blue, and their movements were unnaturally smooth, as if the armor and the person inside were one being. The Varisians had seen soldiers before, but these humans looked like something else entirely. They moved with purpose, calm and precise, as though they were part of a single mind. The air shimmered faintly around them, plasma shields flickering in response to the planet's atmosphere. Every movement made a deep metallic thud that echoed through the earth. The ground itself seemed to recognize their presence. One Varisian child whispered, "Are they machines?" Her mother shook her head slowly. "No, they're Deathworlders." The humans began unloading equipment. They didn't rush. They didn't shout orders. Everything was methodical, practiced 1,000 times before. Portable walls unfolded into barricades. Drones lifted from their packs and flew into the sky, scanning the horizon. Medics checked the wounded Varisians, speaking softly through translators. To the locals, it was strange to see such gentleness in beings who looked built for destruction. Captain Mira Solon watched from the command post, her armor marked with a single red stripe, the sign of a commanding officer. Around her, tactical screens showed the positions of the Kreth forces. Her voice was calm, sharp. "Alpha Squad at North Sector. Bravo, hold the ridge. Civilians stay behind the energy barrier. No unnecessary fire. We keep this clean," her soldiers answered in one voice. "Copy, Commander." To the Kreth Dominion, humans were just another nuisance. They had fought countless species before: tall insectoids, reptilian warriors, even telepaths. All had fallen. When they detected the human dropships, they laughed. Their generals believed this would be easy, another small rebellion to crush. They were wrong. When the first Kreth unit approached, their sensors picked up only silence. The forest ahead was quiet, too quiet. Then came the first strike. A flash of light, a silent burst. One of their armored carriers exploded from within, torn apart by a precise rail slug. Before the Kreth could react, 2 more vehicles vanished. The humans had been waiting. From the trees, shapes moved, fast, silent, and lethal. The human soldiers didn't roar or charge. They appeared like ghosts, firing once, moving again, never staying still. Every shot found its mark. Every grenade landed exactly where it needed to. It was as if the humans had already mapped the entire battlefield in their minds. The Kreth fired wildly into the woods, their plasma bolts burning through branches and dirt. But they hit nothing. The humans were already gone, repositioning, circling them like wolves. One Kreth commander screamed into his communicator, "They're everywhere. I can't see them." The reply never came. The command post had already fallen. From the hills, the Varisians watched in disbelief. They had never seen such control, such discipline. The humans fought without hesitation, but also without rage. They didn't look like killers. They looked like professionals doing what they were born to do. A squad of Varisian scouts tried to follow, but they couldn't even keep up. The humans moved too fast, their armor adapting to terrain, their tactics shifting constantly. It wasn't war, it was precision. Every movement had meaning. Every silence had purpose. By sunset, the battlefield was unrecognizable. The Kreth had come with tanks, walkers, and hovercrafts. Now their machines lay burning in the dirt, smoke rising in pillars. The humans moved among the wreckage, scanning for survivors, rescuing any wounded Varisians they found. They didn't celebrate. They didn't cheer. They simply kept working. A Varisian elder approached Captain Solon, trembling. "You defeated them. In one day." Solon removed her helmet. Her face was streaked with dust and sweat, but her eyes were calm. "We contained them," she said simply. "They'll be back. So we prepare." For the Kreth, it was humiliation. They had faced hundreds of worlds before, and never had they been crushed so completely, so quickly. Their generals refused to believe it at first. They sent more troops, more ships, and still the humans dismantled them. What terrified the Kreth most wasn't just the firepower. It was how humans fought, not like mindless beasts, but like nature itself. There was something almost primal about them, something ancient. When a storm rages, you can't reason with it. When fire burns, it doesn't hate, it simply exists. That's how the Deathworlders fought. The Kreth soldiers said later. It was like fighting the planet itself. Some said the humans could see them before they even appeared. Others claimed their weapons thought faster than a living mind. But the truth was simpler. Humans adapted faster than anyone else. They learned in seconds what others learned in weeks. Every mistake became a lesson. Every loss became fuel. In the middle of the second night, a group of Kreth soldiers tried to ambush a human patrol. They thought they had the advantage, numbers, higher ground, and night vision. But when they opened fire, the humans didn't panic. They dropped into cover, moved as one, and returned fire in perfect formation. In less than a minute, it was over. Not one Kreth survived. One of the Varisian observers later said, "They fight like they've done this 1,000 times before." And maybe they have. By dawn, the plains of Arvin were silent. The smoke of war hung in the air. The Varisians emerged from hiding, stepping carefully around the shattered Kreth machines. Human medics were already tending to the wounded, their voices calm and reassuring. A young Varisian soldier looked up at one of the armored humans and asked quietly, "Are you not afraid?" The human paused before answering. "Of course we are," he said. "Fear keeps us alive. But we don't let it control us." That simple answer spread like wildfire among the survivors. It became a symbol of the Deathworlders' strength. Not that they felt no fear, but that they fought through it anyway. By the end of the first day, the Kreth battalions were gone, wiped out by tactics they couldn't understand. To them, it felt like fighting the elements, relentless, intelligent, and unyielding. The galaxy had always whispered that humans were dangerous, that they were survivors born from a deadly planet. But now those whispers turned into certainty. For the first time, the galaxy truly saw what Deathworlders meant. They were not invaders. They were protectors. But when they fought like nature itself. The war for Varus 9 burned hot but short. In just a few days, the Deathworlders had done what no one else in the galaxy believed possible. They had stopped the Kreth dominion. The enemy fleet was scattered, their armies broken, their banners torn down. The Varisians watched in awe as human soldiers covered in soot and blood marched through the ruined streets not as conquerors, but as guardians. The nightmare was ending. Yet every victory carries a shadow. The Kreth were not a species that surrendered easily. Even when their ground forces were defeated, one of their warships, an enormous dreadnought named Dominion's Claw, slipped through the human defense net. It descended from orbit, its cannons glowing bright orange, aiming straight for the city of Narran's Hold, a refugee center where thousands of civilians, mostly Varisians and Olari, were gathered for evacuation. The humans detected it too late. Their fleet was stretched thin, chasing the last Kreth ships beyond the atmosphere. Only one small squad was close enough to respond. Echo Squad, 12 soldiers of the 9th Expeditionary Force. Their commander was Lieutenant Aaron Vale, a quiet man with a calm voice and a scar running from his temple to his jaw, a reminder of a war long past. When the warning came through, Vale didn't hesitate. "Get the civilians out," he ordered. "We'll hold the line." His second-in-command, Sergeant Kira Dunn, frowned. "Sir, that's a warship. They'll glass the whole district." "I know," Vale said simply, "but someone has to slow them down." The squad moved fast. They took positions along the narrow streets of Narran's Hold, setting up heavy cannons, railguns, and plasma turrets. Civilians screamed and rushed toward the evacuation tunnels that led deep underground. Human medics guided them, helping the injured, calming the terrified. Then the sky opened. A beam of plasma ripped through the clouds, setting the horizon ablaze. Buildings cracked under the shockwave. Echo Squad fired back, tiny streaks of blue light against the fury of a battleship. Their rounds tore into the ship's lower armor, forcing it to slow its approach. Inside his suit, Vale's breathing was steady. "Target its engines. Don't waste ammo on the hull," he said. "Make it hurt." His team obeyed without question. They had trained for this moment 1,000 times. The ground trembled with every blast. Bits of molten metal rained down from the sky, burning holes in the streets. Still they fought. Then the ship's side guns rotated, locking onto their position. The first strike vaporized a nearby tower. The second hit the ground just meters away, throwing half the squad through the air. Kira Dunn's armor was torn open. Her vitals blinked red on Vale's display. "Stay with me," Vale said, dragging her behind a pile of debris. She smiled weakly, blood on her lips. "You always said humans were bad at running away." Vale gave a quiet laugh, the kind that hides pain. "Guess we're proving it." Above them, the Kreth warship roared again. The humans' shields flickered, failing one by one. The squad knew they couldn't win, but that wasn't the point anymore. Every second they fought, more civilians escaped through the tunnels. Every minute they stood, thousands more lived. The Varisian Evacuation Command kept sending desperate messages. "Retreat. You've done enough. Pull back. You can't stop it." But Echo Squad didn't respond. They were too busy holding the line. When their heavy weapons ran dry, they switched to rifles. When the rifles overheated, they used grenades. When those were gone, they fought with whatever they had left. Vale's voice came through the comms, steady as stone. Echo to command. "Civilians clear. Beginning last stand." Those were the final words anyone heard from them. Moments later, the Dominion's Claw fired its main cannon. A column of light engulfed the district. The blast flattened everything within a kilometer. The sensors monitoring the area went dark. The warship, crippled by its own energy overload from firing so close to the surface, began to break apart and fell into the ocean, disappearing beneath the waves. When the dust settled, Narran's Hold was gone. Rescue teams arrived hours later. The tunnels had held. Over 20,000 civilians survived. They found no human soldiers alive on the surface, only broken armor, burnt weapons, and a single beacon still transmitting. It was Vale's communicator. The message was short, distorted by static, but every word carried the weight of history. "Mission complete. Civilians safe. Tell Earth, we stood our ground." That message spread across Varus 9 first, then through the galactic networks. Every channel replayed it. Every newsfeed repeated it. For many, it was the first time they truly understood what kind of beings the Deathworlders were. Until that day, most aliens had only seen humans as warriors, fearsome, unstoppable, sometimes even monstrous. But now they saw something deeper. The same people who could destroy entire fleets had also chosen to die for strangers they barely knew. A Varisian journalist wrote, They came from a world where everything tries to kill them and still they choose to protect. Maybe that is why they are strong. Across the galaxy, the story spread like wildfire. On trading stations, people watched the recording of Vale's last words in silence. In the Kreth Empire, commanders studied the battle and whispered about human courage with a mix of fear and disbelief. Even on distant worlds untouched by the war, children spoke of the Echo Squad who refused to retreat. The Verisians built a monument on the ruins of Narran's Hold. It was made from melted fragments of human armor and alien stone, fused together. At its base, they engraved the words of Vale's final transmission. They stood their ground. Every year, on the day the battle ended, the Verisians held a ceremony. They told their children the story of the humans who came from a deadly world, not to conquer but to save. For Captain Mira Solon, the loss was heavy. She read the transmission in her quarters aboard the Resolute, her face still and unreadable. When an officer asked if they should send recovery teams to bring back Echo Squad's bodies, she shook her head. "No," she said softly. "They've already come home." She turned toward the stars, eyes fixed on the faint light of Varus 9's sun. Let the galaxy remember them as they were, standing. News of the squad's sacrifice changed everything. Until then, humanity had been both feared and respected. Now they were also trusted. Alien governments that once kept their distance began reaching out. Treaties were signed, alliances strengthened, because now the galaxy understood. Humans didn't just fight for themselves. They fought for anyone who needed them. Years later, soldiers from other species trained beside humans, learning from them, not just their tactics, but their values. They learned that true strength wasn't in power, but in purpose. The Kreth Dominion never fully recovered from the defeat on Varus 9. Their fleets retreated into the Outer Rim, afraid of facing the Deathworlders again. Not because humans had the biggest weapons, but because they realized something terrifying. The humans' greatest weapon was their heart. The story of Echo Squad became legend. Songs were written, statues were built. In schools across dozens of worlds, teachers told their students how a handful of humans had changed the course of history. And somewhere in the ruins of Narran's Hold, beneath the ashes and the silence, the ground still bore the marks of their last stand, proof that once, 12 humans had faced the impossible and refused to fall. They had come from a planet known for its danger, from a species shaped by struggle and pain, and in the end, they showed the galaxy that compassion could be stronger than fear, and sacrifice could echo louder than war. Their story lived on, passed from voice to voice, across the stars. Whenever a new colony called for help, people remembered Echo Squad. Whenever someone said, "The Deathworlders are coming," it no longer meant destruction. It meant hope. When the war ended, Varus 9 was a scarred world. The ground still bore the marks of fire, and the air still carried the faint smell of plasma burns and metal. The cities that had once glimmered with trade lights were now half-ruined shells. But among the ashes, life slowly began to return. The Verisians rebuilt, not in fear or despair, but with a new kind of pride. They had survived. And more importantly, they had not survived alone. The humans stayed for months after the last Kreth ship was gone. They helped clear debris, repair water systems, and restore communications. It was strange for many aliens to see. The same armored giants who had fought with terrifying precision were now lifting beams, fixing generators, and teaching Verisian engineers how to build safer defenses. They did not demand tribute or control. They asked for nothing in return. Captain Mira Solon walked through the rebuilt capital one quiet evening. The sun was setting, painting the sky in gold and violet. The Verisians greeted her with respect and warmth, though many still looked at her with awe. They had never known warriors who could be so fierce in battle and yet so gentle in peace. The Council of Varus 9 decided that the courage of the humans should never be forgotten. Together with Earth's engineers, they began building something special, a monument. It rose in the center of the capital, standing taller than any other structure, made from the remains of both human and Verisian materials. Half of it was carved from smooth, dark alien stone that shimmered faintly in the light. The other half was forged from human steel salvaged from broken armor and ship plating. At the center, the two halves joined together in the shape of clasped hands, one alien, one human. When it was finished, thousands gathered for the unveiling. Representatives from dozens of species came to witness the moment. As the sun climbed over the horizon, its rays caught on the steel, lighting up the monument with a fierce glow. The Varisian chancellor stepped forward and read the words engraved at its base aloud for all to hear. They came not to conquer, but to protect. Silence followed those words. Then slowly applause rose, not just from the Varisians but from everyone present. Even the hardened soldiers of the human 9th Expeditionary Force stood still, humbled by the sight. The monument became more than just a memorial, it became a message to the galaxy. It said that humans, the so-called Deathworlders, were not monsters or invaders. They were protectors, shaped by a world that had taught them the value of life through constant struggle. As news of the monument spread, it began to change how other species saw Earth. For decades, the galaxy had feared humans. They had been whispered about in taverns, described as unpredictable, violent, and almost mythical in their toughness. But now, that same fear began to shift into something else: respect. On distant worlds, scholars debated the meaning of the Varus 9 campaign. Military strategists studied human tactics and discipline. But philosophers and historians focused on something deeper: the human's willingness to fight and die, not for gain, but for others. One alien ambassador said in a speech, "They are dangerous, yes, but only because they understand danger better than any of us. Their world made them hard, yet it also made them kind." Children across the colonies began to learn about the Deathworlders in school. Holograms of human soldiers were displayed in classrooms, not as threats, but as heroes who had stood between life and extinction. Captain Mira Solon herself became a legend. Songs were written about her words before the battle. The moment she said, "If no one else will stand for them, we will." Those words echoed across star systems. They were printed on banners, quoted in military academies, even whispered in rebellion movements where the oppressed dreamed of freedom. The 9th Expeditionary Force, once just another Terran unit, became a symbol of what humanity represented. Their story was retold countless times, how they had answered a call from strangers, fought against impossible odds, and won not just through firepower, but through heart. Years later, Varus 9 had become a prosperous hub once again. The scars of war remained, but they were part of the planet's history, reminders of both tragedy and unity. Visitors came from all corners of the galaxy to see the monument. Many left flowers, others left tokens or messages written in dozens of languages. The most common phrase left behind was simple: "Thank you." But while peace had returned, whispers still moved through the darker corners of space. Among smugglers, pirates, and the remnants of the Kreth Dominion, the name Deathworlders carried a new meaning. Once it had inspired fear because of their ferocity. Now it inspired something closer to dread mixed with caution, because everyone knew that if humans came, it was already too late to win. In the outer systems, one Kreth officer was overheard saying to his troops before a retreat, "If the Deathworlders come, surrender." That phrase spread quickly, repeated in nervous tones by those who had seen or heard of the battles. It became an unspoken rule of survival: never provoke the humans. But to the rest of the galaxy, those same words carried a different weight. To the free colonies, it meant hope. If the Deathworlders came, it meant someone powerful had heard their cry. It meant help was coming. Over the years, Earth sent more aid missions, more peacekeepers, and more alliances were formed. Human diplomats worked beside Varisians and other species to rebuild what had been lost. The Terran Federation began to be seen as a force not of conquest but of balance. Even those who still feared humanity had to admit a truth: they were not like other warriors. Their strength was not born from cruelty or ambition, but from survival and empathy. They understood loss, they understood pain, and that understanding made them dangerous in a way that no weapon ever could. One Varisian elder once said during a remembrance ceremony, "They do not fight because they love war. They fight because they cannot bear to see others suffer as they once did." That idea changed the galaxy's view forever. The 9th Expeditionary Force returned to Earth as heroes, but they carried the weight of those they lost. Captain Solon visited the families of Echo Squad, the soldiers who had fallen protecting civilians. She delivered each one a piece of their loved one's armor and told them their story. She didn't glorify their deaths. She spoke of their courage and their kindness. She said they saved a world that wasn't theirs because they believed it should exist. On Varus 9, life continued. Markets reopened, schools filled with laughter, and the sound of rebuilding replaced the sound of war. Yet every year on the day the Creth fell, the Varisians gathered at the monument. Lights covered the square, and the people stood in silence for 1 minute. Then, as the silence broke, they recited the same words written at the base of the monument. They came not to conquer, but to protect. In that moment, no one thought of humans as outsiders. They were remembered as brothers and sisters, guardians from a faraway world who had proven that compassion could be as mighty as any weapon. And across the stars, wherever the story was told, people began to believe in something new. They began to believe that maybe, just maybe, strength and kindness could exist together. That maybe the most dangerous beings in the galaxy were also the ones most willing to defend it. The galaxy had once trembled at the name Deathworlders. Now, it spoke that name with reverence because the humans had shown them that true power wasn't in domination or destruction. True power was in standing up for what was right, even when no one else would. And in the shadows where enemies still plotted and tyrants whispered of revenge, one phrase continued to pass from one fearful mouth to another, quiet but certain, a warning written in the memory of every battlefield. If the Deathworlders come, surrender.